welcome everyone to the Insights from CyberEdge's 2023 Cyberthreat Defense Report webinar. I will be handing the floor shortly over to Steve Piper. He is CyberEdge Group's founder and CEO, as well as NetSurian's Chief Strategy Officer, Ann Anant. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session where you'll have the opportunity to ask Steve and Anant your questions. So as we go through, please keep your questions ready for the Q&A or feel free to type them into the chat as they come up. Without further ado, I will be handing it over to you, Steve.
Okay, great. Thanks, Megan. I appreciate it. And Anant, a special thank you as well for joining me and offer color commentary. I had so much fun presenting with you last year. We're so grateful to have NetSurian back in as a sponsor of our 10th annual Cyberthreat Defense Report. When we talked about our webinar planning, I made Anant make a promise to me that he's going to keep this interactive, just like last year, interject, offer color commentary. I love co-presenting with smart people like Anant. So Anant, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, Steve. We find that the data is where you need to go. I mean, opinions are good and all, but ultimately you go where the data takes you, and that's the specialty of CyberEdge's defense report.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we're going to start out with level setting you. I'm going to assume that you don't know anything about our cyber threat defense report. Hopefully that's not true since we've been doing this 10 years. But I want to talk a little bit about the report and the demographics of the report. But the big thing I want to talk about is how can this report be helpful to you in your role at your organization? Okay, so first level setting about the report. I already mentioned that we're in our 10th year of our CDR, the Cyber Threat Defense Report. There are a gazillion of research studies out there mostly from cybersecurity vendors, some research organizations. And many of those reports talk about data breaches. They talk about cyber threats specifically, how they happen, that sort of thing. That's not what this report is about. If you want to get into the minds of cybersecurity professionals, that's what this report is about. So every November, so that we do an online survey. So the survey that served the foundation for this report was conducted last November. And there are two requirements for all of the respondents. Every respondent has to be a security professional, either decision maker or a practitioner of some kind. And they have to work for an organization with 500 or more employees. And in a moment, I'll get into the demographics and you'll see we have a nice cross section. So there are 4 sections to the report, and that's how this webinar is organized. We're not going to have time to go through every single finding of the report. In fact, we'll go through about half, but at the end, I'm going to tell you how to get your hands on a copy of the report. And if you're a visual person like me, get your hands on the infographic as well. But the survey is designed to assess organization security posture. So questions that we ask, were you victimized? Do you think you will be in the coming year? And just different perceptions of their security posture. Then perceptions of cyber threats and IT security challenges, followed by current and future security investments. What investments have you made today? What are you making? Where are you making investments in the coming year? And finally, IT security practices and strategies. Okay. So next slide here. In terms of demographics, this is a very statistically significant research studies. So the global findings have a survey margin of error plus or minus 3% with our 1,200 respondents. And this is a global study. So 17 countries from every region of the world, including the Middle East and Africa and Latin America, and 19 different industries. Only 29% of the responses came from the United States. The rest are spread across 16 additional countries. And as you see, this is a nice cross-section of company sizes. So less than 20% were those SMEs, the small to medium-sized enterprises. So think of this research study really as an enterprise class study. And Anant, I know that the depth and breadth of this report is one of the things that attracted NetSurian to be a gold sponsor. Is that fair?
Yeah, actually, I think the important lesson to learn from this slide is that the takeaways that this thing's going to give you are going to apply to you no matter what part of the world you're in, And no matter what company size you are, I mean, every so often we hear about from prospects that say, well, that can't be my problem because I'm too small, or I'm living in a cave in Afghanistan. Well, maybe not if you're living in a cave in Afghanistan, but except for that, if you're on the network anywhere in the world, any company size, then the takeaways from this study really do apply to you. And that's what this slide really is showing.
Yeah, excellent. All right, let's move on to the next slide. And this is the important slide here. I'm going to answer the WIFM question. What's in it for me? Or in other words, what am I hoping that each of you are going to achieve by the end of this webinar? Well, first, I want you to, throughout this webinar, and like I said, we're going to cover about half of the major findings of the 2023 CDR. I want you in your head to benchmark your organization against your peers. In all instances, your peers globally, and in some instances, we'll talk about comparisons to industries or countries, but really you'll find that breakdown if you download the full Cyber Threat Defense Report again. But if there's something that bothers you, okay, you guys are not making an investment. Maybe you're not outsourcing advanced threat prevention and you wish you were, or you're not investing in zero trust, or there's a best practice that you're not doing. Maybe your board of directors is not engaging security professionals. I want you to download the report and take the report to the powers that be, your manager or your CISO, and provide this independent third-party, highly statistically significant data to lobby for whatever it is that you want to lobby for. Okay, so that's really what I'm hoping you're going to get out of this webinar. So let's go ahead and move forward. As you saw on this slide, and I talked about earlier, there's 4 main sections of the report, starting with current security posture. Okay, so we'll jump into the first slide here. We start out the survey every year the same way. Okay, in the preceding 12 months, was your organization victimized by a successful cyber attack? Small, medium, large, whether it's an outright data breach or ransomware attack or DDoS attack or any form of cyber attack, was your organization successfully compromised by a successful attack? We have 10 years of data here, okay? 10 years ago, when we asked this question, it was about 62%. Over the last 3 years, it's been hovering around 85 to 86%. We see by industry, finance, and telecom, they're a little bit more affected than manufacturing and government. But at the end of the day, about 7 out of 8 organizations were successfully compromised by at least one successful attack. And in terms of the frequency of successful attacks, 12%, okay, were victimized by 10 or more successful attacks in that preceding months. Ananth, what's your reaction here?
Well, I think what this shows you is once you're a victim, that is to say, some bad guy figures out a vulnerability, a weakness, then pretty much every other bad guy does too. And so this sort of begs the question, why aren't you vulnerability scanning yourself? Why aren't you red teaming yourself? So one takeaway from here is, whatever be your weakness, everybody comes to know about it pretty fast. This also speaks to the fact that cybercrime has now become a specialty. There are folks that specialize in identifying vulnerabilities, and maybe that's what's going on. But in any case, the lesson to take away is that if you get attacked once, you shouldn't be saying, well, that's over and done with, and I can now rest for the next couple of years, because statistically, the odds are it won't happen again. Not true. This is most likely going to happen again and again and again. So you need to really gird up those defenses.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Megan, do me a favor if you'd be so kind. Go back to just one slide preceding to that. Yeah, this is perfect. So as security professionals, we're not, at least when it comes to data breaches, successful attacks, that sort of thing, I think over the last decade, we've grown from being, more optimistic to pessimistic, and with good reason. As security professionals, we don't get good news as much as we like. Every year we do the CDR, we choose an image for the cover. and the image ties to a theme. Last year's CDR, we had a bunch of images of people working from home because they were still working home, during the pandemic. This year we chose a woman with a data center behind her, and she has a little bit of a smile, just a little one. I'm going to call it a cautiously optimistic smile. The reason I bring this up is one of the themes of this year's CDR is there are some things that we're happy about. Okay, things seem to be moving in the right direction, and this is one. Okay, now going from 2 years ago, 86% of organizations victimized by one or more attacks, to last year 85%, to this year rounding up to 85%. Okay, this is not life-changing, but we're going to take good news wherever we can get it. This is the first time in CDR history that we had 2 consecutive years where we see a little bit of a drop. Okay. Now, Megan, if you can jump ahead to two slides, one of the questions that we ask. Oh, and I'm sorry. Sorry. One of the questions that we do ask, and I guess we're not covering this today, is about pessimism. And pessimism is actually decreasing as well, the likelihood for attacks in the coming year. So we have some things that we're happy about. But this is an interesting question, and this is a scale of 1 to 5 question, 5 being highest, and you'll see that we have lots of 1 to 5 questions. 5 is always highest, and when you see charts like this, the findings in red are bad or maybe not as good, and the findings in the light blue color are good or maybe not as bad. So to paraphrase the question we asked here, of these different classes of IT assets, scale of 1 to 5, 5 being highest, rate your overall confidence in securing these classes of assets against cyber threats. Okay, top of the list, no big surprise to me, servers, physical and virtual servers, things that are more static, cloud infrastructure, cloud applications. That has risen up through the years, and kudos to the security industry and end users for making investments in cloud security. Down at the bottom of the list, however, this year's weakest links, industrial control systems, SCADA devices, PLC devices. These are devices typically managed by critical infrastructure players, your oil pipelines and power plants, and also IoT, Internet of Things. As the years go by, we see more things in our workplace that are connected to the network. Voice over IP phones, video conference systems, even the copier down the hall is connected to the internet. These things have vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities can be exploited, so it's important to secure those. Mobile devices and APIs are also a little bit more challenging. Anant, what are your takeaways in looking at these findings?
A couple of things. One, look at the range. What this tells you is that if you're not considering everything in your enterprise, then no cigar, because it really doesn't matter where the bad guy gets a toehold. Once they do, they're going to move laterally. One of the things that we are seeing increasingly in 2023 is that the OT network and the IT network are sharing the same infrastructure at the back, maybe the same authentication mechanism. And so if they can compromise your camera or your sensor, and you're using these because you wanted to deal with work from home, or you wanted to gain an efficiency and have your HVAC system controlled remotely, whatever be your reason, or you're in manufacturing or you're in a hospital, why then you probably have OT. And if that's sharing the same network as IT, and they can get in through a much less well-defended OT device, game over. So you need to really think about securing the whole shooting match. No good declaring that your endpoint protection is solid or that your servers are safe and secure, because they can get at you from your Office 365 or from your Google Workspace and jump from there to wherever. So please think about your entire infrastructure. Oh, by the way, dare I say that includes users too. Very often the weakest link in any organization.
We are going to talk about that, and that's one of my pet peeves. So we're going to talk about what I call the lack of investment in human firewalls, and security awareness. That's one of our themes in every year. So excellent observations. All right, moving on. Another 1 to 5 question, 5 being highest, rate your overall confidence in performing these various IT security functions. So kind of like the last slide, which Anant pointed out, not a huge range here, 4.03 to 4.13. So these are all very challenging functions. but we're feeling a little more confident about identity and access management, app development and testing, security engineering. Down at the bottom of the list, attack surface reduction, scanning for vulnerabilities, patching vulnerabilities, verifying those patches through penetration testing. All these activities that help reduce your overall attack surface. That is this year's biggest challenge, followed by third-party risk management, and then back to our theme. One of the themes of our CDR is underinvesting in our human firewalls. User security awareness continues to be a very big challenge. Anant, what are your takeaways here?
I mean, I think some of these things outsource well, some of these things outsource poorly. Attack surface reduction is a thankless job. It must be done 24/7. It requires good knowledge of your current network and how your topology is, but it is something that a third party can do well. On the other hand, application development is probably something that you should keep yourself. Certainly governance is something that you can't wish away. You can get help, but that probably really belongs to you. So one of the things you need to think about is, since you shouldn't really be trying to eat the entire elephant by yourself, where can you get help such that you can actually cover these instead of simply throwing your hands up and says, can't do it? Because if you did that, well, that's where they're going to get you. So look at this from what outsources well, and if you can do that, well, do that. I mean, there's no shame, or there's no nothing is lost by having someone else do the work for you, especially if they're a specialist, and they can do it with staff, and they can do it at a cost that's actually more efficient, and that's actually a win, and you should take that.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And actually, that's a segue to, I think it's the next slide we can go ahead and advance to, where we talk about the skill shortage and a way that I recommend to help mitigate some of the challenges related to skill shortages. Okay, we know, all of us know, that qualified, talented security professionals are in high demand. 6 out of 7 organizations this year, 86.6%, almost a record of organizations are experiencing a shortage of personnel. Okay, this is in all industries, but finance and telecom are particularly affected. I want to take a moment to backtrack to last year's CDR and talk about a stat. One of the ways that you can help mitigate, there's actually a couple of things you can do to help mitigate this skill shortage. I'm a big believer in training and certification, and using training and certification as a recruiting tool and a retention tool. But there are certain areas that are very challenging to outsource. So in last year and 3 years prior, in 2019 and 22, we asked, are you outsourcing one or more security functions to a managed security services provider, an MSS provider, okay? And what we learned was in 2019, it was 90% of organizations were outsourcing at least one function. And in 2022, it was 93%. So right off the bat, if you're not outsourcing, if you're not leveraging managed security services to your advantage, you're in the minority here. But more importantly here is, okay, of the 8 or whatever different functions that you could outsource, which ones are you most commonly outsourcing? Again, this is last year's CDR. Last year, #1 function, detecting and responding to advanced cyber threats / managed detection and response, okay? Or often these days, managed XDR, okay? So here's the takeaway. You've got a skill shortage. If detecting advanced threats, cyber threat hunting, all these functions, if that's where you're experiencing the skill shortage, you know what? Instead of spinning your wheels trying to hire the right talent, outsource it. Outsource it to companies where that's all they do, or that's their primary focus. You can leverage best practices and then fill other gaps in other areas that are easier to recruit. So I know it's from last year, but I think it's worth a quick flashback. Anant, I'm gonna guess you're drinking my Kool-Aid.
I am, and Megan, if you go back one slide, I'll tell you that it is all we do We're a managed security services provider. We're processing upwards of 20 billion events every day. And we've got triple-digit sized teams, and skill shortage is a problem for us. We operate globally. We're not dependent on just people in the United States. And we see this problem every day. So if you're trying to hire 2, 3, 4 people, that's definitely going to be a much more serious problem for you. We have the luxury of being able to grow teams because this is our thing. And so if it's going to take a year or two to get somebody up to speed, well, that's something that we will do. But I think your point's well taken, that if this is not a problem that you can solve, well, think about adding a tiger on your team that isn't necessarily on your team. That is to say, doesn't necessarily wear the same badge that you do, but shares the same mission, shares the same fate, if you like. That's the best way of trying to address this. This has been a problem for 5, 6, 7 years. And there is no evidence that this is going to solve in 2024 or 2025. And anyway, waiting around till then is not really an option. So think about getting somebody else on your team that can do these things, or at least the things that you particularly do need to get done on an emergency or an urgent basis.
Yep, couldn't agree more. All right, moving on. We still have some additional findings we're going to talk about. We understand how bad that shortage is. We also asked which roles are you experiencing the biggest shortages? The light blue is 2022. The dark blue is 2023. Number 1 in both years, IT security administrator. Number 2 last year was a security analyst. This year it's IT security architect, followed by IT security analyst. So really across the board, even down at the bottom, a risk fraud analyst, 1 out of every 4 organizations is experiencing a shortage. So, all right, moving on. Okay, the next section here is perceptions and concerns. So this is our second of 4 sections that we're covering in this webinar. Okay, so another 1 to 5 question, 5 being highest. Rate your overall concern for these different classes of cyber threats, okay? And we've been seeing malware, phishing and spear phishing, and ransomware in the top 3. Account takeover attacks, credential abuse attacks, that's been rising through the charts. Down at the bottom, zero-day attacks, okay? Good news, bad news regarding 0 days, right? So the good news is 1 out of every 100 vulnerabilities, 1 out of every 100 CVEs that are registered, actually less than 1 out of 100 CVEs that are registered in MITRE's database, common vulnerabilities and exposures, originates as a 0-day vulnerability, something discovered by a bad guy, or not discovered by the software provider itself, the OS vendor or the app vendor. More good news, smart security vendors like Neturian and many others, once they detect attacks that they've never seen before, they're often reverse engineered, and the window that 0-day vulnerabilities is shrinking as years go by. Kudos to the security industry for making just tremendous investments in artificial intelligence and machine learning and security analytics and behavioral analytics and so on. So those 0 days, now, I mean, if you are victimized, that's bad, especially if you're relying predominantly on signature-based technologies and not, for example, embracing XDR, things like that. Drive-by downloads, watering hole attacks, just visiting a website and getting infected, don't see that as much as well. Okay. All right, moving on. Now, there are 2 indices in our Cyber Threat Defense Report that we have each year. The first one is called the Threat Concern Index. And what we do is we take the average 1 to 5 rating of all those different classes of cyber threats, and we look at the responses for 1,200 respondents across all those 1 to 5 ratings, and we boil it down to 1 number. Okay. The last 2 years, the average concern for cyber threats was 3.88 and 3.88, dropped a little bit this year to 3.82. Not a big variance, but again, this goes back to the theme that we might, I'm going to bold underline the word might. We might be slowly turning the corner and getting the upper hand against our cyber adversaries. Okay, and so we're you know, I'm happy to see a little bit less of a concern for cyber threats, and I hope it keeps trending in that direction. We'll see. Okay. All right, moving on. Okay, so we're going to talk about ransomware, and we have a few slides here talking about ransomware. Ananth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the ransomware slides and then pause, and you know, if you have anything you want to add. So we certainly do, you know, we saw a slight reduction to overall successful attacks, but unfortunately that doesn't apply to ransomware. Okay, so this on the chart on the left, these are the percentage of organizations that were successfully victimized by ransomware. We have a record. Okay, last year was 71. This year, rounding 73% of organizations 500 plus employees were victimized last year. Okay, the middle chart, we asked, okay, so you were victimized. Did you pay the ransom? If this is the first time you've ever attended a CDR webinar, at least in recent years, you may have the misconception that most organizations don't pay ransoms. That ain't true. Most organizations do pay ransoms. Okay, so 6 years ago it was 39%, less than half, and then 45% less than half. But for the last 4 years, it's been the majority. Last year, 60% of organizations, like, you know, Colonial Pipeline, when they were attacked, they initially paid that ransom. And many organizations, you know, right or wrong, there's lots of pros, lots of cons to paying. But please know that you know, 60% of organizations that were successfully attacked by ransomware paid the ransom last year. Then we asked, okay, ransom payers, you paid the ransom, did you get your data back? When we first asked this question 6 years ago, we made headlines across the entire industry. I think the Wall Street Journal even picked it up, where less than half, 49% of ransom payers got their data back. That's bad for business. You know, there's ransomware gangs out there that are committing 99.999 whatever percent of these ransomware attacks. And so if word gets out there that you're not getting your data back, well, that's bad for business. So the last 3 years, it's been hovering around 72, 73%. But still, you know, can you imagine you're a CISO, you're lobbying to get approval to pay a ransom, and you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even millions of dollars, and you pay it and you still don't recover your data? Wow, that's a big pill to swallow. Next slide, we'll cover a few more ransomware statistics, and then I'm going to ask Ananth to chime in. There's one chart in our CDR in recent years from a third-party company. I don't know anybody at Coveware. I don't believe we don't have any business relationship with them, but I'm a fan of their research. They're one of the vendors out there that can help mitigate risks for ransomware, help you be prepared in advance for ransomware, and even negotiate, like, you know, hostage negotiation, because they're taking your data hostage. They negotiate the reduction usually by about 50%. But they have these quarterly ransomware reports that I find compelling. And we can see 3 years ago, the average was about 112,000. It's almost quadrupled, okay, in the last 3 years, okay? And then moving on. And then this is the last ransomware slide. This was a new question we asked this year. We've heard anecdotally about ransomware attacks, not only focusing on encryption, where your data is encrypted, and if you don't pay the Bitcoin by this date and time, you'll never see your data again, and blah, 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 blah. But we've heard anecdotal references to double extortion, triple extortion. So a new question we asked this year was, you know, okay, of those ransomware victims, okay, was it only about data encryption, or were there other threats made? So we learned two interesting things here. First, we learned that only, and if you look at the light blue, lose encrypted data only, that threat, let's round that to 22%. That means 78% of ransomware attacks had at least one more threat, okay? And the chart on the left, 41% had 2 threats total, 30.4% had 3 threats total, 2 additional, and then in red, 7.2% had the whole enchilada, all 4, including, and this is the chart on the right, threatening to commit DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, threatening to notify your customers of the ransomware attacks or the media, or in some instances, exfiltrating data and threatening to expose that data publicly if you don't pay the ransom. So long gone are the days where ransomware is just about encryption only. almost 4 in 5 ransomware attacks have additional threats. Anant, we've covered a lot of ransomware stats here. We're going to move on, but before we do you have any reaction to all this ransomware stats?
Couple of things. The reason why ransomware is in the news is because it works. The bad guys are making money out of it, so they do it again and again. And by the way, they're indiscriminate. They will hit you if you're Lake City, Florida. They'll hit you if you're Baltimore, Maryland. They'll hit you no matter who you are, what size you are. The fact that, you know, a majority of the victims actually pay tells you that for these people, they've made the cold heart, you know, the cold calculation that they're losing $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a day. Every day they're down. And if they actually pay this money, is it possible, 70% possible, that you're going to get back on your feet? And for many medium and small businesses, even though you might morally think that this is objectionable, even though the FBI might advise you that you should never do this, the fact of the matter is it becomes an existential thing. And the ransomware crime gangs know this, which is why, of course, it's such a thing, and it's occurring over and over again. And you see this in the news, and it's increasing in velocity and in volume.
Yeah, it absolutely is. All right, running a little short on time, but let's go ahead and finish out the final questions and final topics, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. This is one of my favorite questions that we ask, and this really leads to the second of the 2 indices that we talk about in each year's CDR. So this is, okay, Mr., Mrs., Miss Security Professional, what is standing in the way of being successful in defending your organizations against cyber attacks? What are barriers standing in the way? Okay, let's get another scale of 1 to 5 question, 5 being highest. The top 2 are generally the top 2 year after year. They kind of flip. Number 1, lack of skilled personnel. We've talked about ways that you can mitigate that by outsourcing 1 or more security functions where you have those shortages. And we learned last year, number 1 function to outsource is advanced threat protection. Number 2, low security awareness among employees. We are not doing enough as an industry to educate our workforce about how to not click on URLs and emails, how to detect spear phishing emails and other things. Down at the bottom, it's not about too many false positives. Kudos to the security industry. I love this. We have made innovations in artificial intelligence, machine learning, behavioral analytics, sandboxing before then, and we're getting really good at it. So false positives is not a big problem. That's great. Lack of contextual information from security tools. I love XDR because XDR is about sharing infrastructure, sharing information, and just many other solutions as well. And so we're providing contextual information among different solutions. It's also not about the Benjamins. It's not lack of budget. Okay, you know, so some interesting takeaways here. Now let's move on to the next slide here because this is the second of the 2 indices. This is the Security Concern Index. I jokingly call this the Frustration Index. So this is the average 1 to 5 rating across all those barriers that we just talked about. So some good news here. A couple years ago, we hit our peak, especially in the early stages of the pandemic. You know, our personal lives are turned upside down, and trying to secure work from home devices, it was a nightmare. And it was almost like a 2-way tie last year, 3.65, 3.64, little drop. Okay, not a huge variance, but I like the trajectory. Okay, we're starting to get less stressed out as security professionals, so that's good to see. Okay, all right, moving on. Hybrid cloud. Okay, and you know, hybrid cloud environments, the larger the organization, the odds are that this is, you know, this is going to be a situation that organizations embrace. It's the new normal. Okay, but there are security challenges for the new normal of hybrid cloud environments. So basically, we asked of these different challenges, which are affecting your organization the most. Okay, number 1, top of the list, detecting unauthorized apps. This is your stereotypical shadow IT scenario. Number 2, detecting and responding to cyber threats. Down at the bottom, still a bit of a challenge, but meeting internal SLOs, your service level objectives. Anant, what are your takeaways here?
Coverage again, right? I mean, you have to think about the whole shooting match. No point declaring victory just because you can or you did something about regulatory compliance. No cigar if you're not inspecting container traffic, no cigar if you're not detecting shadow IT or crypto mining. And so whatever solution or service you're thinking about, make sure it's ticking all of these boxes.
Completely agree. All right, next topic. Okay, so now we're in section 3 out of the 4 sections, current and future investments. Okay, so we asked, what is the health of your security budget in the coming year? Is it going up? Is it going down? If it's going up, by how much? If it's going down, by how much? So I'm going to start with the chart on the right. The chart on the right is the percentage of organizations with rising security budgets. Good news here, 80s, and let me backtrack just for a moment. I should have said this at the onset. This question was asked in November of 2022, okay? So it was before the banking crisis, and before hearing about all of these different layoffs. So it's possible that budgets were recalibrated after we asked this question in November. But at least at the time, 88% of organizations' budgets were going up, and they were going up by an average of 5.3%. So that's good that we're seeing more investments in people and technologies and also services as well. Okay. All right, next slide. So every year we ask, and across a few different categories of technologies, which technologies are you currently using? That's the first column of the table. Or which technologies are planned for acquisition in the coming year? That's the middle column. Or you just don't have plans at all, and that's the third column. In this case, we're talking about endpoint security. The darker the color, the bigger the number. Basic AV, signature-based AV, it's not going away anytime soon. And it really, in my eyes, does play a role. It gets rid of the low-hanging, easy-to-detect stuff so that your more resource-intensive stuff that's detecting unknown threats can do its thing. But what's interesting in the middle column here, deception technology, I'm a big fan of that. It's been growing in popularity over the years. Think honeypots, but think managed honeypots that can exist on endpoints and also on servers and other assets, followed by browser or internet isolation, micro virtualization, so running browsers in the cloud, for example, and then advanced or endpoint protection platforms, and your advanced AV, anti-malware that have techniques built into them for detecting those unknown threats. These are some of the more popular things. What are your insights here, Anant?
Well, you have many endpoints, and many of them are now working from home. They're a popular target because very often, aside of the number of them, they're being run by non-technical people. And of course, attackers are capitalistic pigs, and they want to do the minimum effort in order to get through, just like the rest of us. And so if you're still using basic antivirus, 72.6% currently in use, then that's really easy for the attacker, because there's no attack today that these basic signature-based things can actually defeat. And so if there is one thing that you should do quickly, it is to upgrade that to something that's based on AI, that's based on signatureless, that's based on deep learning. And that's something that surely Natsuran can help you with, but that is something that you should consider quickly. You have to do something. You may as well do that same thing, but for pretty much the same price, you can do it much more effectively. And so that is something to consider, because you get good, really good bang for the buck.
Yep, completely agree. All right, next topic. Same question, but going back one to same question, but security management and operations. Active Directory protection has grown over the years to be a staple of security management and operations. Cyber risk quantification scorecards, that's going to come up when we talk about a new question we added this year about engaging boards of directors. The middle column, the hottest security management operations technology plan for acquisition in 2023. Full capture packet or full packet capture and analysis. Think of it as a network DVR, capturing everything it's configured to capture, but it's a great tool that you can use not only for detecting advanced threats, but also trying to figure out what happened after a successful attack and understanding the scope of what happened in that attack. Advanced security analytics has also been rising over the years, and vulnerability management, vulnerability assessment, also, very common. I'm a big fan of risk-based vulnerability management, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later. So, all right, moving on. And then heading down the home stretch, and this is a great opportunity to submit any questions. We'd love to hear your questions. Practices and strategies, so final section. All right. I'm a monster fan of zero trust, okay? Have been for years. A new question that we asked this year is, what technologies play the most important role in your zero trust endeavors? Zero trust is not a product, it's a framework. It's a collection of technologies that integrate together, and multi-factor authentication is at the top of the list, followed by EDR. Down at the bottom of the list, and this is a little surprising to me, but thought about it more, network segmentation, micro-segmentation. After an attack happens, you want to make sure that you can limit their east-west visibility and, spanning the network so they're only connecting to segments of the network that they need to do their job for the host that's been compromised. But this is, I guess, hard to do. So I don't know. Were you surprised to see that down at the bottom, Anant?
I was. By the way, notice that that's what really saved the Maersk line in 2018 when NotPetya hit. It didn't help in the end because the port of Rotterdam got clogged, but at least Maersk was able to recover because of the fact that they had segmentation, and this thing didn't cripple them top to bottom. It only cost them 200 million to recover versus shudder what might it have actually cost. But it is surprising, and I think you're right. It's because it's really difficult to do. We know people that have used public IP addresses by mistake inside their private network, and for years and years have been looking for an opportunity to correct that mistake once they understood what that problem really was and what they screwed up, and yet they've been unable to do so years and years later. So it's not something easy, even if you recognize that it's an issue. It takes time to get it sorted out, particularly when you're in production.
Yep, very good. All right, next topic. We're heading down the home stretch here. New question we added this year. I really like this question. So we asked, okay, do you have a board of directors? And if so, how are your security leaders engaging with those board members? And if so, how are they doing it? Pie chart on the left, we learned that, and this was comforting, 97% of organizations have their security leaders engage with their board of directors. If your company is not doing it, take this page of the report to the powers that be. They need to. And we're hearing about board engagement a lot over recent years for very good reason. The other part is how. How are you engaging boards of directors? Top of the list, providing monthly, quarterly, or annual cyber risk assessment reports. And number two, and I alluded to this briefly earlier, provide board access to cyber risk quantification scorecard systems. So that's a really nice tool. And why not give access to your board so that they can have some real-time information? But there's a lot of ways that we can engage with, as security leaders, engage with our boards. Anant, what are your thoughts here?
Well, two things. Number one, as cybersecurity professionals, we really do need to learn to talk business because that's what's interesting to the board. And too often we're interested in our own technical language and vocabulary, and that causes a disconnect. So one good piece of advice for everyone on the call, you should learn to talk business. The second thing is, if you've got vendors helping you, make sure they help you in this area too. What sorts of reports are they providing you? Can you tell a story to the board with them? Are they giving you charts, visualizations that illustrate how, for example, you're doing with your peers? It's not just about performing detect and response, but it's to be able to present that to the board because they're the ones that have overall responsibility. They're the ones who you ask for risk appetite and therefore correspondingly budget. And so make sure that the vendor you're engaged with is giving you material that is board friendly.
Yep, totally agree. All right, XDR, monster fan of XDR. We asked, which of the following use cases are XDR use cases are most beneficial to your organization? Top of the list, no surprise here, identifying hidden cyber threats. Number two, improving productivity of security personnel, using XDR to work smarter, not just harder. accelerating incident investigation response. Down at the bottom of the list, mitigating alert fatigue, reducing product purchase costs and acquisition costs, because many times different XDR components are sourced from the same vendor, and reducing false positives. So a lot of benefits here to XDR. All right, next topic, and this is our final topic before I offer a few closing thoughts and most importantly tell you how to get your hands on the 2023 CDR report. We end the survey each year about asking about emerging security technologies, and some of these, maybe emerging isn't quite, but quite the right term, because many of these have been around for years. But our organizations, do they have these things currently in production? That's the light blue. Implementation is progress. That's the medium. Implementation beginning soon. That's the dark blue. Or red, no plans at all. Okay. Across the board, 2/3 of organizations have been implementing all of these. Okay. I am a fan of risk-based vulnerability management, not only prioritizing vulnerability patching based on CVSS score, the common vulnerability scoring system, but also are there exploits in the wild? Okay, because typically only in any given year, only about 7%-ish of vulnerabilities are actually exploited in the wild. So with risk-based vulnerability management, let's prioritize our patching, not only by severity, but also the existence of exploits in the wild and other ingredients as well. Talked about zero trust, XDR, so please use this report to your advantage if you haven't invested in some of these emerging technologies. All right, let's move on to summary here, the road ahead. Key takeaways: we continue to face many challenges. Okay, even though attacks have gone down 2 consecutive years, it's only by collectively like 1.5 percentage point. It's still bad out there. So about 6 out of 7 organizations are victimized by a successful attack. Ransomware, things are getting worse, and we have to do better as an organization, or as a security professionals. Outsourcing security functions that are most challenging, like threat prevention, and investing more in our human firewalls, improving security awareness, because that's a big challenge. Lack of skilled personnel and security awareness. Securing the modern attack surface. IoT and OT are this year's weakest links. Mobile devices continue to be a challenge. Number 1 most challenging security function: attack surface reduction, followed by third-party risk management. But, and this is the next slide, we are seeing some positive developments. That's one of the themes of this year's CDR. Things are getting less worse. We're getting less pessimistic. Are we finally turning a corner? I'm hoping we're going to continue these trends next year. We did see our first ever 2-year decline in security team frustrations, diminished pessimism regarding the likelihood of successful attacks, and promising investments in XDR, risk-based vulnerability management, zero trust, and so on. Okay. All right. And then in closing, before we open it up to Q&A, please download the report. Go to netshurian.com/CDR. Access the report, access the infographic, use the report as your secret weapon to lobby for whatever it is you want to lobby for, because this report globally has a 3% margin of error, highly reliable data. All right, and the next slide here, we'll go ahead and open it up. I do want to thank NetShurian for returning as a gold sponsor. Very happy to do this webinar with you last year and also this year, Anant. You're a smart guy. I love co-presenting with you. So I guess we'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Steve and Anant. We really appreciated those insights. It was really, really interesting. We did have some questions come in throughout the presentation. We are getting close on time, so if you do have any questions we don't get to, you can reach out to info@netshurian.com. And again, that full report will be available on netshurian.com/CDR. So this one can be for either of you. What surprised you most about this year's CDR findings?
Anant, you want to go first?
Well, the slight decrease was the most surprising. But I guess I'll take refuge in Benjamin Disraeli's statement that there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so I would caution against, reading too much into it. That said, I think there is an increased level of awareness. There's an increased budget. I think COVID, in some sense, rewired us all to rethink and reimagine. And digitalization is actually a thing in many industries that have been traditionally resistant to it. And so overall, the fact that good guys are collaborating like the bad guys are, there's more awareness, all of this is to the good, but don't read too much into it. But that was certainly a pleasant surprise.
Yeah. My biggest surprise, and I think I touched on it, we didn't have it as a slide because we just didn't have enough time, but we asked a question about, okay, how are you improving security awareness? Are you doing live training? Are you investing in these anti-phishing training simulation type things? And a couple things really bothered me is that less than half of the companies do security awareness training at onboarding. Okay, it was 47%. And in terms of doing annual training, 52%. We're not, I mean, come on, guys. Training your workforce, I think we can do better than that. We need to get better than 52% of doing, annual training. We've got to do more to invest in our human firewalls. So that was a big surprise to me.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. Anant, this one's for you. Kind of touches on XDR. And in the report, as much as a point of XDR is, sourcing key security components from the same vendor, this person asked, I would have thought that reducing product acquisition costs would have ranked higher. Was that something that was surprising to you as well?
It was, but I think what it speaks to the fact is that many people aren't really looking for XDR per se, but they're looking for managed XDR, particularly managed open XDR, because they've already made investments in security and they'd be interested in integrating those. And after all, skill shortage was up there as one of the major issues. So it's not surprising that that's really more top of mind than acquisition costs. Besides, people are very good at fighting for budget and then beating up vendors for discounts. But as someone noticed, right, if you beat up HP for a discount and you got 90%, and whatever it is that you bought sort of sat there in your data center and never really got implemented, did you waste 10% or did you save 90%? So no cigar for actually buying things. And so I think that's really what's going on, which is leading to that sentiment.
Absolutely. And kind of going off of that, there's a lot of emerging technologies that were mentioned in the report. For example, it's getting difficult to tell, what's XDR, what's SIM, what's EDR. And this person says, when all I really want is security monitoring and threat detection across my assets. Is there any advice on how to navigate this?
Well, that person probably really is thinking XDR. The X is for extension. And SIM, of course, doesn't really do much by way of response. So if you're looking for a response, as the question was, and that is certainly something that you should be thinking about. But there's a lot of information available at netsurian.com to help you make sense out of the word salad. And of course, EDR is an assumption that your problems begin and in fact end at the endpoint. There's so much more to the network, as you saw in the coverage questions. You've got SASE, you've got PaaS, you've got users, you've got work from home devices, you've got shadow IT. And so simply thinking EDR, because everything you think begins and ends at the endpoint, is simply not okay for today. And if you're going to extend, don't just extend to detection, extend to response as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And this will be the last question here. Anant, I'll give this one to you. I think this one might test you a little bit. The report mentions that XDR is an emerging technology, as we covered. What are you hearing about XDR? We're hearing a lot from security vendors about the technology. More and more are mentioning it. How do you think Netsurian XDR differentiates, amongst all the others on the market?
Two things. Our service is managed, and so we're not throwing technology at you and assuming that you're going to somehow figure it out, because in fact that is the biggest problem, bar none. That's the growler below the waterline. that the Titanic pays no attention to and then winds up, sunk. So we are a managed service, unlike other XDRs. And the second thing is that we're open in the sense that we're not trying to sell you a word processor, or we're not trying to sell you a cloud service, unlike some of the others, and who work really well within their ecosystem. But then when you have, disparate technologies, that's somehow challenging. We recognize that rip and replace is not really practical, and that you must leverage all of your investments. So when you're comparing XDRs, there's many different varieties. There's native, there's open, there is managed, there is self-managed. And so when you look at it, those are some angles by which you can differentiate one from the other. And we have some excellent information on our website underneath the Insights button that helps you understand these differences.